Late Wednesday evening, a federal court handed down a ruling against the Trump administration, arguing that the President of the United States does not have authority under law to impose certain tariffs, and going so far as to say that the tariffs that Donald Trump imposed on Liberation Day, April the 2nd, are beyond the scope of his authority. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis. What am I talking about? Hang on, and we're going to get into all this in just 1 second. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Another day and another ruling against the Trump administration, a ruling that many on the conservative side of the aisle would argue is an unconstitutional restriction upon legitimate executive functioning of the president. And another ruling that is hurtling us closer and closer to a confrontation between the executive and the judicial branches of government, where, depending upon what happens, either the president is going to be forced to take action on his own and ignore the courts, or comply in such a manner that the executive branch will be stripped of its power. I take you to the pages of thehill.com and we'll find out what's going on. Headline: Court of International Trade blocks Trump's tariffs in sweeping ruling. Article by Zach Schoenfeld. We have the following. Dateline, New York City. A federal court ruled Wednesday that an emergency law does not provide President Trump with unilateral authority to impose tariffs on nearly every country, blocking a series of tariff announcements dating back to February that have rattled financial markets. The three-judge panel on the U.S. Court of International Trade unanimously ruled Congress did not delegate unbounded tariff authority to the president in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, IEEPA, the linchpin of Trump's legal defense. Quote, an unlimited delegation of tariff authority would constitute an improper abdication of legislative power to another branch of government, the court wrote in its unsigned opinion. Regardless of whether the court views the president's actions through the non-delegation doctrine, through the major questions doctrine, or simply the separation of powers in mind, any interpretation of IEEPA that delegates unlimited tariff authority is unconstitutional, the opinion continued. The Trump administration quickly appealed the decision Wednesday evening. Quote, the IEEPA authorizes the president to impose necessary economic sanctions during an emergency to combat an unusual and extraordinary threat. Trump has attempted to invoke the law to impose widespread tariffs by citing trade deficits and the threat posed by international drug cartels. Quote, foreign countries' non-reciprocal treatment of the United States has fueled America's historic and persistent trade deficits, White House spokesman Kush Desai said in a statement. These deficits have created a national emergency that have decimated American communities, left our workers behind, and weakened our defense industrial base, facts that the court did not dispute, Desai continued. It is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency. President Trump pledged to put America first, and the administration is committed to using every lever of executive power to address this crisis and restore American greatness. Wednesday's ruling blocks Trump's April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs, which placed a 10% levy on all imports and higher reciprocal tariffs for dozens of countries. It also blocks earlier orders that imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Many have been adjusted as of or delayed as stocks fell and Treasury yields rose in the wake of Trump's tariff shifts. The judges gave the Trump administration 10 days to issue any administrative orders needed to effectuate their ruling. The three-judge panel comprised of Judge Timothy Reif, a Trump appointee, Judge Jane Ristani, an appointee of former President Reagan, and Judge Gary Katzman, an appointee of former President Obama. The decision came in response to two separate lawsuits, part of a broader wave of litigation challenging Trump's tariffs. One filed by a group of small businesses specifically focused on Trump's Liberation Day announcement, but the other brought by a group of Democrat state attorney generals led by Oregon challenged a broader set of tariffs. Before the ruling that the IEEPA does not authorize Trump's tariffs, the court rejected the administration's threshold arguments, including that the president's orders are now a political question not subject to court review. Quote, this reliance on the political question doctrine is misplaced, the unanimous panel wrote. Okay, let's get into this. You know, a lot of these rulings you might be able to sit back and say, okay, maybe the Trump administration overstepped their boundaries. If it had been one ruling, that would be one thing. But it's ruling after ruling after ruling after ruling on almost any subject related to the functioning of the executive branch. This one, however, may be the most egregious and over the top, and strikes at the very heart of Trump's ability to enact trade deals that he feels will better the lives of the average American. So is the court really wrong on this one? Well, this one, from a plain reading of the law, they may very well be. I take you to a Twitter thread that actually is pretty informative on this question. From the Twitter thread of Behezy Tweets, we have the following. The Trade Act of 1974 could not be any clearer. It allows the president to impose tariffs if a foreign country doesn't play fair. 19 U.S.C. 2411. If the U.S. Trade Representative determines that an act or policy or practice of a foreign country is unreasonable or discriminatory and burdens or restricts the United States commerce, an action by the U.S. is appropriate, the Trade Representative shall have all appropriate and feasible action authorized under subsection to obtain the elimination of that act, policy, or practice. Going a little bit further into the tweet, however, is the one question that definitely ought to be answered. And this has to do directly with the court's ruling. Under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which gives the president more tariff authority for purposes of economic security, 50 U.S.C. Section 1701 reads, quote, any authority granted to the president by Section 1702 of this title may be exercised to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States, to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States if the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat. Going a little bit further, and that gets us into 1702. At the times and to the extent specified in Section 1701 of this title, the President may, under such regulations as he may prescribe by means of instruction, license, or otherwise, investigate, regulate, prohibit any transaction in foreign exchange, transfers of credits and payments by, through, or to any banking institution, the importing or exporting of currencies or securities by any person, investigate, block the pendency of any investigation, regulate, direct, or compel, nullify, void, prohibit any acquisition, holding, withholding, use, transfer, withdrawal, transportation, importation, or exportation of, or dealing in, or exercising any right, power, privilege, etc., any property in which foreign country or a national thereof has any interest by any person with respect to property subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And then one more, going back to the question of tariffs, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 empowers the president to impose tariffs if he deems them necessary to maintain national security. Ladies and gentlemen, I said at the beginning of my video that we are in the middle of a constitutional crisis, and I don't know how else to describe it. And my question is, where does it stop? Every day, every time the Trump administration tries to do something in its executive authority granted to it by the Constitution and, more importantly, by congressional law, someone's going into court issuing an injunction somewhere, usually in a district court, to try to stop the president. Now, take the question of Donald Trump out of this altogether. Let's just talk about the authority of the executive branch to function. The executive branch is given broad power. Now, one can argue whether that power is too broad or not. That's perfectly fine. But as it currently stands right now, particularly on the question of tariffs, The Trump administration, or the executive branch in general, has broad authority to impose tariffs as is necessary if it deems it to be a national emergency. Well, this ruling from the court is frankly, in my opinion, so egregiously over the top, this is going to get overturned and frankly needs to be. This has got to stop. And the only place it can stop is the Supreme Court of the United States. And frankly, we're in this mess because Chief Justice John Roberts will not rein these lower courts in. They're being allowed to run amok. They're forcing the President of the United States into a position either he blatantly disregards a court order or he basically allows himself or the branch that he represents to be stripped of any power that it has. This is John Roberts' doing. We're not here because Donald Trump overstepped his authority. We're here because John Roberts won't exercise his. It is my hope that when the court hands down a series of rulings toward the end of the month of June, that we finally get some clarification on this question. Can a lower court impede the president to this extent? Now, the Trump administration has immediately appealed the decision of the International Court of Trade, so we'll see where this goes. But this one is just so over the top. I mean, as a legal scholar recently said, what's next? That the court is going to order a lifetime supply of cocaine for Volodymyr Zelensky? Well, Robert Barnes is of the opinion that might be what's next, and he may not be too far off the mark. Granted, he was joking, but at the rate it's going, it's not much of a joke. It might just happen. But that's what I've got to say about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. Number two, please hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment about this video. Believe it or not, it really does help with the outreach to people who may not be familiar with my work. Number three, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when something new is coming out, be it a video like this one or a live stream. And finally, share the link to this channel around with your friends. We are a going little concern, and we like to become a going big concern. We can do that with your help. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative, and I will see you next time.